The bullet hit the wooden post 3 inches from Grace Patterson's head, and instead of screaming like any sensible woman would have done, she turned and fired back at the rustlers trying to steal her father's cattle. It was the spring of 1883 in Golden, Colorado, and Grace had just turned 22 years old the week before her father collapsed in the barn and never woke up again. Now she stood alone on the ranch he had built with his own 2 hands, facing down 3 men who thought a woman would be easy pickings. She proved them wrong that day, sending them running with their tails between their legs and nothing to show for their trouble but holes in their hats. But winning one fight did not mean winning the war, and Grace knew that keeping a ranch running required more than just good aim and stubborn determination. The Patterson Ranch sprawled across 200 acres of Colorado grassland, with the Rocky Mountains rising like jagged teeth against the western sky. Her father had chosen this land carefully, with access to a year-round creek and natural shelter from the worst winter storms. He had taught Grace everything he knew about ranching, from birthing calves to breaking horses, from reading weather signs to managing accounts. Some folks in town had whispered that it was not proper for a man to raise his daughter like a son, especially after Grace's mother had died of fever when Grace was only 8 years old. But Thomas Patterson had never been one to care much about what other people thought was proper, and he had raised his daughter to be capable and strong. Now, Grace stood in the ranch office, looking at the ledgers and trying to figure out how she was going to keep everything running. She had some money saved, enough to get through the summer if she was careful, but she needed help. The ranch required at least 3 hired hands during the busy seasons, and right now she had none. Her father's last hired man had left 2 weeks before Thomas died, heading to Montana to try his luck in the gold fields. Grace had managed alone for the past month, but she was exhausted, and she knew she could not keep it up indefinitely. She rode into Golden the next morning, sitting tall in her saddle despite the weight of worry pressing down on her shoulders. The town had grown considerably in the past decade, with the arrival of the railroad bringing new businesses and new people. The main street bustled with activity, as freight wagons rumbled past storefronts and women in their best dresses picked their way along the wooden sidewalks. Grace tied her horse outside the mercantile and walked down to the small building that served as the office for the Cattlemen's Association. If she was going to find experienced ranch hands, this was the place to start. The man behind the desk looked up when she entered, his eyebrows rising in surprise. "Miss Patterson, I heard about your father. My condolences." "Thank you, Mr. Henderson. I am here because I need to hire some hands for the ranch. I was hoping you might know of some good men looking for work." Henderson leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting from surprise to something that looked almost like pity. "Now, Miss Patterson, I think you need to be realistic about your situation. Running a ranch is not work for a woman. Have you thought about selling? I know several gentlemen who would be interested in making you a fair offer." Grace felt her jaw tighten. "The ranch is not for sale. I just need help to run it. Surely there are men in the area looking for work." "There are," Henderson agreed, "but no respectable hand is going to want to work for a woman. It is not natural and it is not right. You should sell while you can still get a good price, before word gets around that the Patterson place is being run into the ground." The word stung, but Grace kept her voice level. "My father built that ranch from nothing, and I am not going to let it go without a fight. If you will not help me find workers, I will find them myself." She turned and walked out before Henderson could respond, her boots ringing sharply on the wooden floor. Outside, the spring sunshine felt warm on her face but did nothing to ease the cold knot of anxiety in her stomach. She had known this would not be easy, but she had not expected to face such open dismissal. Taking a deep breath, she decided to try the saloon. It was not a place respectable women usually went, but Grace was past caring about respectability. She needed help, and she would go wherever she had to go to find it. The Golden Star Saloon was quiet at this hour of the morning, with only a few early drinkers hunched over their whiskey glasses. The bartender gave her a startled look when she walked in, but she ignored him and scanned the room. In the back corner, she spotted three men who had the weathered look of experienced ranch hands. She walked over to their table, ignoring the curious stares from the other patrons. "Gentlemen, I am looking to hire hands for my ranch. The pay is fair and the work is steady. Are any of you interested?" The oldest of the three men looked her up and down, then spat tobacco juice into a nearby spittoon. "You are that Patterson girl, are you not? Heard your old man died. You selling the place?" "No, I am running it. I need 3 good hands willing to work hard." The man laughed, a harsh sound that held no humor. "Work for a woman? Not a chance, sweetheart. Why do not you go home and find yourself a husband? Let him worry about the ranch." The other 2 men chuckled, and Grace felt her face flush with anger and humiliation, but she kept her voice steady. "The offer is $40 a month plus room and board. If you change your mind, you know where to find me." She left the saloon with her head held high, but inside she felt her confidence wavering. She spent the rest of the morning trying to find help, but everywhere she went the answer was the same. Men either laughed at her, ignored her, or told her outright that they would not work for a woman. By noon, she was tired and frustrated and beginning to wonder if Henderson had been right. Maybe she should just sell and be done with it. She was untying her horse when she heard a commotion down the street. A group of men had gathered outside the livery stable, their voices raised in anger. Grace hesitated, then curiosity got the better of her and she walked over to see what was happening. As she drew closer, she could hear what they were saying. "I do not care what arrangement you had with the previous owner," a harsh voice declared. "I bought this livery fair and square, and I am telling you to clear out. I do not need a hand, especially one who has been making eyes at my daughter." "I have not been making eyes at anyone," a different voice replied, younger and calmer but with an edge of steel underneath. "And I was hired for 6 months. I have 3 months left on that contract. Contract is not worth the paper it is written on now that old man Fletcher is dead. Now get your things and get out of my sight." Grace pushed through the crowd and saw 2 men facing each other in front of the livery stable. The first was Luther Briggs, a heavy-set man with a red face who had moved to Golden about a year ago. He had a reputation for being difficult and mean-spirited, and his daughter Sarah was a quiet girl who rarely spoke to anyone. The second man was younger, probably close to Grace's own age, with dark hair and gray eyes that held a stubborn determination. He wore the practical clothes of a working cowboy, and Grace could see a bedroll and saddlebags at his feet. "You owe me 3 months' wages," the younger man said quietly. "I do not owe you anything," Briggs snarled. "Now get out of here before I have the sheriff throw you out." Grace found herself speaking before she could think better of it. "I will hire him." Every head turned toward her and Briggs's eyes narrowed. "What did you say?" "I said I will hire him. I am looking for ranch hands, and if he was good enough for Mr. Fletcher, he is good enough for me." She looked at the younger man. "What is your name?" "Morgan Garrett, madam." He studied her with those gray eyes, and Grace had the feeling he was seeing more than just a desperate woman trying to save her ranch. "Can you handle cattle, Mr. Garrett?" "Yes, madam. I have been working ranches since I was 14. I can rope, brand, break horses, mend fences, and just about anything else that needs doing." "Then the job is yours if you want it. $40 a month plus room and board." Morgan Garrett looked at her for a long moment, and Grace wondered what he saw. A foolish woman trying to do a man's job, or someone who was willing to take a chance when no one else would. Finally, he nodded. "I will take it." "Good. Get your things and meet me at the Patterson Ranch. It is about 5 miles north of town, near Cotton Creek." Briggs stepped forward, his face twisted with anger. "You are making a mistake, Miss Patterson. You cannot run a ranch alone, and hiring drifters is not going to change that." Grace met his gaze without flinching. "That is my concern, not yours, Mr. Briggs." She turned back to Morgan. "I will see you this afternoon." She walked back to her horse and rode out of town, her heart pounding. She had just hired a complete stranger based on nothing more than instinct and desperation. For all she knew, Morgan Garrett could be a thief or a troublemaker or completely incompetent. But something about the way he had stood up to Briggs, calm and unafraid, had impressed her. And more than that, he had not laughed at her or dismissed her because she was a woman. He had simply asked if she was offering him a job. Morgan arrived at the ranch 3 hours later, riding a sturdy bay horse and leading a pack mule. Grace met him in the yard and showed him around, pointing out the barn, the bunkhouse, the corrals, and the various outbuildings. The ranch was well maintained despite her father's recent death, and she could see Morgan taking it all in with an experienced eye. "You have good grazing land," he observed. "And that creek is a real asset. How many head are you running?" "About 300. My father was planning to increase the herd this year, but then he died and everything got put on hold." Morgan nodded. 300 is a good number for land this size. You will need more help during roundup and branding, but one good hand should be enough to keep things running day to day. "One hand," Grace frowned. "My father always employed at least 3. Your father was not working the ranch himself. You are. Between the two of us, we should be able to manage." He paused, then added carefully, "Unless you are planning to stay in the house and let me handle everything outside." Grace shook her head firmly. "I have been working this ranch alongside my father since I was old enough to sit a horse. I am not going to stop now." Something that might have been approval flickered in Morgan's gray eyes. "Good. Then let me get settled in the bunkhouse, and you can show me what needs doing." Over the next few days, Grace learned that Morgan Garrett was everything he had claimed to be and more. He worked from dawn until dusk without complaint, handling tasks with the quiet competence of someone who had spent his whole life on ranches. He was good with the horses, patient with the cattle, and skilled at all the practical work that kept a ranch running. But more than that, he treated Grace like a partner rather than an employer. He asked her opinion on decisions, listened when she explained how her father had done things, and never once suggested that she should leave the hard work to him. They fell into an easy rhythm, working side by side to mend fences, check on the cattle, and prepare for the upcoming branding season. Morgan moved through the work with an economy of motion that spoke of long experience, and Grace found herself watching him when she thought he was not looking. He was a good-looking man, with strong features and a lean, muscular build, but it was more than that. There was a steadiness about him, a quiet strength that made her feel safe for the first time since her father had died. One afternoon, as they were working together to repair a section of corral fence, Grace asked the question that had been on her mind since the day they met. "Why did Luther Briggs really fire you?" Morgan hammered a nail into the fence post before answering. "Pretty much what he said. He bought the livery from old man Fletcher's widow, and he decided he did not need my help. But the real reason was his daughter." Grace felt an unexpected twinge of something that might have been jealousy. "Sarah, I gave her a book." Morgan's voice was matter-of-fact. She came into the livery one day with bruises on her arms, trying to hide them under her sleeves. We got to talking, and she mentioned that she liked to read but her father did not approve. Said reading was a waste of time for women. I had an old copy of Jane Eyre that belonged to my mother, and I lent it to her. Briggs found out and decided I was trying to court his daughter. He was not happy about it. Were you trying to court her, I mean? Morgan looked at her then, and Grace felt her breath catch at the intensity in his gray eyes. No. I felt sorry for her, being trapped in that house with a father like Briggs, but I was not courting her. He paused. I do not generally pursue women who are already spoken for or unavailable. And I do not play games with people's feelings. There was something in the way he said it, in the way he looked at her, that made Grace's heart beat faster. She turned back to the fence, hammering a nail with more force than necessary to cover her confusion. That was kind of you. To give her the book, I mean. Kindness had nothing to do with it. Everyone deserves a chance to better themselves, to see beyond their current circumstances. Your father must have believed that, or he would not have taught you everything he knew about ranching. Most people think he did me a disservice, that he should have taught me to be a proper lady instead of a ranch hand. Most people are fools. Morgan's voice was flat and certain. You are doing what needs to be done and doing it well. Anyone who cannot see that is not worth your time. Grace felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. Morgan Garrett might be a hired hand, but he spoke to her with more respect than most of the so-called gentlemen in Golden had ever shown. She found herself wanting to know more about him, to understand what had shaped him into the man he was. As the days turned into weeks, Grace discovered that working alongside Morgan was the most natural thing in the world. They developed an unspoken understanding, each anticipating what the other needed without having to ask. When a calf got stuck in the creek mud, they worked together to pull it free, and Grace felt the strength in Morgan's hands as he helped her maintain her grip on the rope. When a late spring storm blew in, they rushed together to get the horses into the barn, and she was acutely aware of his presence beside her in the darkness, his shoulder brushing against hers as they worked. But it was not all work. In the evenings, after the chores were done and dinner was eaten, they would sometimes sit on the porch and talk. Morgan told her about growing up on a small ranch in Texas, the youngest of 4 brothers. His parents had died when he was 16, and the ranch had been sold to pay their debts. His brothers had gone their separate ways, and Morgan had spent the past 9 years working on various ranches across the West, never staying in one place too long. Why not? Grace asked one evening as they watched the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Morgan was quiet for a moment. I guess I was looking for something. I just did not know what it was. And now, he turned to look at her, and in the fading light his eyes were very dark. Now I think maybe I have found it. Grace's breath caught, and for a moment the air between them seemed charged with possibility. Then Morgan stood up, breaking the spell. I should check on the horses one more time before bed. Good night, Miss Patterson. Grace, she said softly. You can call me Grace. He smiled, a real smile that transformed his usually serious face. Good night, Grace. The next morning, Grace rode into town to pick up supplies from the mercantile. She was loading sacks of flour and sugar into her wagon when she heard a familiar voice behind her. Grace Patterson, as I live and breathe. I heard you were trying to run your father's ranch all by yourself. Grace turned to see Amanda Winters, a woman she had known since childhood. Amanda had married a successful merchant 3 years ago, and now spent her time organizing church socials and making sure everyone in town knew about her good fortune. She stood on the sidewalk in an elaborate blue dress, her blonde hair perfectly arranged under a fashionable hat, looking at Grace with a mixture of pity and superiority. Hello, Amanda. Yes, I am running the ranch, and I am not doing it by myself. I hired a hand to help." Amanda's eyes widened with exaggerated shock. "You hired a man? Grace, you cannot be serious. A young, unmarried woman living alone on a ranch with a hired hand. What will people say?" "I do not particularly care what people say. The ranch needs work and Morgan is helping me do it." "Morgan, is it? You are already on a first-name basis." Amanda leaned closer, lowering her voice in a conspiratorial whisper. "Grace, you need to think about your reputation. If you are not careful, you will end up ruined, and then no decent man will want to marry you. Why do not you just sell the ranch and find yourself a husband? I know several gentlemen who would be happy to court you if you would just act like a proper lady." Grace felt her temper rising. "I do not want to be courted by anyone. I want to run my ranch and be left alone to do it." "You cannot mean that. Every woman wants a husband and children. It is not natural to want to spend your life working like a man. Maybe I am not like every other woman." Grace hoisted the last sack of flour into the wagon with more force than necessary. "Now, if you will excuse me, I have work to do." She climbed onto the wagon seat and drove away, leaving Amanda standing on the sidewalk with her mouth hanging open. But as Grace headed out of town, she could not help but think about Amanda's words. Was she ruining her reputation by living alone on the ranch with Morgan? Would people in town start talking about her, making assumptions about their relationship? The truth was, she did not care. Or at least, she told herself she did not care. What mattered was keeping the ranch running, preserving her father's legacy. Everything else was secondary. But as she drove home through the afternoon sunshine, she found her thoughts turning to Morgan in a way that had nothing to do with ranch work. She remembered the way he looked at her sometimes, with an intensity that made her skin tingle. She thought about his strong hands and quiet competence, the way he treated her as an equal, the sound of his laugh on the rare occasions when something amused him. Grace realized with a start that she was falling in love with him. The thought should have frightened her, but instead she felt a strange sense of rightness, as if this was exactly what was supposed to happen. She had never been interested in the young men who had courted her in the past, had never understood what all the fuss about romance was supposed to be. But with Morgan, everything was different. She wanted to be near him, wanted to hear his voice and see his smile. She wanted to know everything about him, wanted to share her thoughts and dreams with him in a way she had never wanted with anyone else. The question was, did he feel the same way? He had said he thought he had found what he was looking for, but he had not specifically said it was her. Maybe she was reading too much into his words, seeing what she wanted to see rather than what was actually there. When she arrived back at the ranch, Morgan came out to help her unload the supplies. As they worked together, carrying sacks into the kitchen, Grace found herself studying his face, trying to read his expression. He seemed quieter than usual, almost distracted, and she wondered if something was bothering him. "Is everything all right?" she asked as they finished putting away the last of the supplies. Morgan leaned against the kitchen counter, his expression troubled. "I rode out to check the north pasture this morning while you were in town. There are signs that someone has been cutting your fence." Grace felt a chill run down her spine. Rustlers? Maybe. Or maybe just someone trying to let your cattle drift onto their land. Either way, it is not good. I mended the fence, but we need to keep a closer eye on things. "Do you have any idea who might be doing it?" Morgan hesitated. "There are a few ranchers in the area who might see a woman running a ranch as an easy target. Or it could be someone who wants to buy your land and is trying to make things difficult for you so you will sell." Grace thought of the conversation she had had with Henderson at the Cattlemen's Association and the various other people who had told her she should sell. "There are plenty of people who would be happy to see me fail. Then we will make sure that does not happen," Morgan's voice was firm. "I will ride the fence line every day, and we will keep the cattle closer to the main buildings. If anyone tries anything, they will have to go through me first." The protective note in his voice made Grace's heart swell. "Thank you, Morgan. I do not know what I would have done without you these past few weeks." He looked at her then, and the expression in his eyes made her breath catch. "Grace, I need to tell you something." Before he could continue, they heard the sound of horses approaching. Morgan moved to the window and looked out, his body tensing. "You have visitors, 3 riders, and they do not look friendly." Grace joined him at the window and felt her stomach drop. Luther Briggs was riding into her yard, accompanied by 2 other men she recognized as some of the rougher characters from town. She stepped outside onto the porch, and Morgan followed close behind her. Briggs pulled his horse to a stop and looked down at her with an expression of barely concealed hostility. "Miss Patterson, I heard you hired Morgan Garrett to work your ranch." "That is correct. Is there a problem, Mr. Briggs?" "Yes, there is a problem. Garrett is a troublemaker and a bad influence. I want him off your ranch and out of this area." Grace felt her temper flare. "Mr. Garrett works for me, and where he goes is none of your concern." "It is my concern when he is sneaking around trying to corrupt my daughter." "I warned you once, Garrett. I'm not warning you again." Morgan stepped forward, his voice calm but cold. "I have not been anywhere near your daughter, Briggs. I have been working this ranch, just like Miss Patterson hired me to do." "I do not believe you. I know your type. You are just like all the other saddle tramps, looking to cause trouble and take advantage of people." Briggs turned his attention back to Grace. "Miss Patterson, if you know what is good for you, you will send this man packing. A woman in your position cannot afford to be associated with troublemakers. And a man in your position should not be riding onto other people's property making threats," Grace replied, her voice sharp. "Now I think you should leave, Mr. Briggs, before I have to ask you more forcefully." Briggs's face turned red with anger. "You are making a mistake, both of you. This is not over." He wheeled his horse around and rode out of the yard, his 2 companions following close behind. Grace watched them go, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. When they were out of sight, she turned to Morgan. "What was that really about?" Morgan's jaw was tight. "Briggs is a bully who thinks he can push people around. He is angry because I stood up to him, and he is taking it out on both of us. He said you were corrupting his daughter." "What did he mean by that?" "I told you I gave Sarah a book. Apparently Briggs thinks that encouraging a woman to read is corrupting her. He probably thinks I was trying to turn her against him." Morgan paused, then added quietly, "He might not be entirely wrong about that. Sarah deserves better than being trapped in that house with a father who treats her like property." Grace understood then. Morgan had given Sarah Briggs something her father could not control: ideas and hope and a glimpse of a world beyond her small, restricted life. And Luther Briggs saw that as a threat to his authority. It made her respect Morgan even more, but it also worried her. Men like Briggs were dangerous when they felt their control slipping. "We need to be careful," she said. "Briggs is not going to let this go." "I know. But I am not leaving, Grace. Not unless you want me to." She met his gray eyes and spoke from her heart. "I do not want you to leave. I want you to stay." Something shifted in his expression, and for a moment Grace thought he might say more. But then he simply nodded and turned back toward the barn, leaving her standing alone on the porch with her heart racing. That night, Grace lay awake in her bed, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling around her. She thought about Morgan sleeping in the bunkhouse, wondered if he was awake too, thinking about her. The feelings that had been growing inside her for weeks could no longer be denied or ignored. She was in love with Morgan Garrett, deeply and completely, in a way that both thrilled and terrified her. but she had no idea if he felt the same way. He had said he wanted to stay, but that could just be professional loyalty. He had looked at her with intensity and warmth, but maybe she was reading too much into it. Grace had no experience with romance or courtship, had never learned the subtle language of attraction that other women seemed to understand instinctively. All she knew was that the thought of Morgan leaving made her chest ache with loss, while the thought of him staying filled her with a hope so fierce it almost hurt. The next few days passed in a tense waiting period. Grace and Morgan worked together as always, but there was a new awareness between them, a crackling tension that made every accidental touch feel charged with meaning. Grace found herself constantly aware of where Morgan was, what he was doing, the sound of his voice and the sight of his smile. She caught him watching her sometimes, his gray eyes dark with an emotion she could not quite read. Then, one afternoon nearly a week after Briggs's visit, everything changed. Grace and Morgan were working in the barn, treating a horse that had developed a sore hoof, when they heard someone calling from outside. Grace straightened up and walked to the barn door, shading her eyes against the bright sunlight. A young woman was hurrying across the yard toward them, her dress dusty and torn, her blonde hair falling loose around her shoulders. It took Grace a moment to recognize Sarah Briggs. "Please," Sarah gasped as she reached the barn. "Please, you have to help me. I have nowhere else to go." Morgan appeared beside Grace, his expression instantly alert. "What happened? Are you hurt?" Sarah shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "My father found out that I have been reading books from the lending library. He said I was defying him, that I was becoming just as troublesome as you said I would be. He locked me in my room and said he was going to send me away to live with his sister in Missouri, to a place where they would teach me proper obedience." She looked at Morgan with desperate eyes. "I remembered what you said about everyone deserving a chance to better themselves. So I climbed out the window and took one of the horses. I know my father will come looking for me. I just need somewhere to stay until I can figure out what to do." Grace looked at Morgan, saw her own concern reflected in his face. Taking in Sarah Briggs would mean making an enemy of her father, and Luther Briggs had already proven himself to be vindictive and dangerous. But turning away a young woman in distress went against everything Grace believed in. "You can stay here," Grace said firmly. "Come inside and let me get you some water, then you can tell us everything." Sarah followed Grace into the house while Morgan went to take care of Sarah's horse. In the kitchen, Grace poured water from the pitcher and handed Sarah a glass, then sat down across from her at the table. Up close, she could see faint bruises on Sarah's wrists, marks that looked like they had come from someone gripping her too hard. "How long has your father been hurting you?" Grace asked gently. Sarah looked down at her hands. "Always. Ever since I was small. He has rules for everything, and if I break them, he gets angry. He says it is his duty to discipline me to keep me on the right path, but lately it has gotten worse. After Mr. Garrett gave me that book, I started going to the library whenever I could slip away. I started reading and learning about the world beyond Golden, and my father could tell I was changing. He could not control me the way he used to, and it made him furious." Morgan came into the kitchen then, and Sarah looked up at him with something like worship in her eyes. "You opened a door for me when you gave me that book. You showed me that there could be more to life than what my father wanted. I will never be able to thank you enough for that." Grace saw the way Sarah looked at Morgan and felt a sharp twist of jealousy. But then Morgan spoke, his voice kind but firm. "You do not need to thank me, Sarah. You did this yourself. You were brave enough to seek out knowledge even when you knew it would make your life harder. That took real courage." Before anyone could say more, they heard the thunder of hoofbeats outside. Grace rushed to the window and felt her heart sink. Luther Briggs was back, and this time he had brought at least a dozen men with him. She recognized several ranch hands from neighboring properties, along with some of the tougher characters from town. They filled the yard, and Briggs sat at their head like a general commanding an army. "Patterson," Briggs bellowed, "send my daughter out here right now." Grace stepped out onto the porch with Morgan close behind her. Sarah stayed inside, but Grace could see her frightened face through the window. "Your daughter has asked for my protection, Mr. Briggs. I am not going to send her back to a place where she is being mistreated." Briggs's face turned purple with rage. "That is my daughter, and what happens in my house is my business. You have no right to interfere. I have every right to provide sanctuary to someone who needs help. Sarah is an adult, and she has made her choice. She is a foolish girl who does not know what is good for her, and you are a foolish woman playing at being a rancher." Briggs gestured to the men around him. "I brought witnesses. These men will testify that you are unfit to run this property, that you are harboring runaways and causing trouble in this community. The Cattlemen's Association will revoke your membership, and the bank will call in your father's loans. You will lose everything unless you hand over my daughter right now." Grace felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. She knew Briggs had influence in Golden, knew that he could make good on his threats. But she also knew that backing down now would mean abandoning Sarah to her father's abuse. And more than that, it would mean proving everyone right who said that women did not belong on ranches, that Grace could not handle the responsibility her father had left her. "I am not giving you Sarah," Grace said quietly. "And if you try to take her by force, I will shoot the first man who sets foot on my porch." She heard Morgan move beside her, and when she glanced over she saw that he had drawn his revolver. He held it casually, pointed at the ground, but the message was clear. Briggs saw it too, and his expression turned even uglier. "You are threatening me. Both of you are going to regret this. I will make sure of it. This ranch will be mine by the end of the month, and you will be run out of Colorado." "Then you better get started, because we are not going anywhere," Morgan said, his voice hard as iron. For a long moment, the two groups faced each other across the yard. Grace could feel the tension stretched tight as a wire, could sense how close they were to violence. Then one of the men with Briggs spoke up, a grizzled old rancher named Tom McKenna whom Grace had known since childhood. "Hold on now, Luther. This is not right. If the girl does not want to go home, we cannot force her, and threatening to take Miss Patterson's ranch just because you are angry. That is not how we do things around here." Several of the other men murmured agreement, and Grace saw doubt flicker across some of the faces. Briggs looked around at his supporter and seemed to realize that he was losing them. His face twisted with fury, but he reined in his horse and pointed a shaking finger at Grace. "This is not over. Not by a long shot. You are going to pay for this, Patterson, and you too, Garrett. I will see both of you broken before I am done." He rode out of the yard, and after a moment's hesitation, most of the other men followed. But Tom McKenna stayed behind. He dismounted and walked up to the porch, his weathered face serious. "Miss Patterson, I need to warn you. Briggs has been talking to the other ranchers, trying to convince them that having a woman running a ranch sets a bad precedent. He has been saying that if you succeed, other women will get ideas, and it will upset the natural order of things." Some of the men agree with him. Grace felt her heart sink. "And you, Mr. McKenna, do you think women should not run ranches?" Tom McKenna looked at her for a long moment, then shook his head. "I think your father was one of the best ranchers in Colorado, and I think he taught you everything he knew. I think you have as much right to this land as anyone, but I am just one man, and I do not have much influence. Briggs has been working hard to turn people against you, and I am afraid he might succeed. What can I do? Prove him wrong." Show everyone that you can run this ranch as well as any man. And be careful, because Briggs is not the kind of man who forgives easily. He will come after you again, one way or another." After McKenna left, Grace went back inside to find Sarah sitting at the kitchen table, crying quietly. Morgan stood by the window, his expression grim. Grace sat down next to Sarah and took her hand. "You can stay here as long as you need to. We will figure this out." Sarah looked up, her eyes red and swollen. "I have ruined everything for you. My father is going to destroy your ranch, and it is all my fault." "None of this is your fault," Grace said firmly. "Your father is the one making threats and causing trouble. You just wanted to be free." "But what if he does take your ranch? What if you lose everything because you helped me?" Morgan turned from the window. "Then we will deal with it. But we are not going to let Briggs win without a fight." Over the next few weeks, they did exactly that. Grace worked harder than she ever had in her life, determined to prove that she could run the ranch successfully. Morgan was with her every step of the way, and together they managed to keep everything running smoothly despite the constant undercurrent of tension. Sarah helped where she could, learning quickly and working hard to prove that she was not just a burden, but Briggs was true to his word. He spread rumors throughout Golden that Grace's ranch was failing, that she was neglecting her cattle and letting her property fall into disrepair. He convinced several local merchants to stop extending her credit, forcing her to pay cash for supplies. Worst of all, he persuaded the foreman of the largest ranch in the area, a man named Charles Donovan, who oversaw thousands of acres and hundreds of head of cattle, to speak out against Grace at the next Cattlemen's Association meeting. Grace rode into town for that meeting with her head held high and her stomach in knots. Morgan wanted to come with her, but she insisted on going alone. This was something she had to face herself. The meeting was held in the back room of the Golden Star Saloon, and when Grace walked in, she could feel the hostile stares from many of the men present. She took a seat in the back and waited. Charles Donovan was a tall, imposing man in his 50s with iron gray hair and a commanding presence. He had been foreman of the massive Rutherford Ranch for nearly 20 years, and his word carried enormous weight in the ranching community. When he stood up to speak, the room fell silent. "Gentlemen, we have a situation that needs to be addressed. Miss Patterson's ranch is in trouble, and it is affecting all of us. Cattle have been wandering off her property onto neighboring land because her fences are not being properly maintained. Her herd is not being managed correctly, which could lead to disease spreading to our animals. And most importantly, she is setting a dangerous precedent by insisting that a woman can do a man's job." He paused, looking directly at Grace. "Now I know some of you think I am being harsh. Miss Patterson's father was a good man and a fine rancher. But the simple fact is that ranching is hard, dangerous work that requires strength and endurance and a level of toughness that women simply do not possess. It is not about being cruel or unfair. It is about being realistic. Women do not belong on ranches, at least not running them. They belong in homes, raising families, providing the gentleness and civilization that makes all our hard work worthwhile." Several men nodded in agreement, and Grace felt her face burning with humiliation and anger. But before she could stand to defend herself, she heard a commotion at the door. Morgan strode into the room, his face set in hard lines. He had ignored her instructions to stay at the ranch, and Grace did not know whether to be grateful or furious. "That is interesting, Donovan, because I have been working Miss Patterson's ranch for the past 2 months, and I have not seen any of the problems you are describing. Her fences are in excellent condition because we check them every day. Her cattle are healthy and well managed. And as for women not being tough enough for ranch work, I have seen Grace Patterson work from dawn until dusk in the blazing sun, pull calves out of mud, wrestle steers twice her weight, and face down armed rustlers without blinking. She is tougher than half the men in this room, and she has more honor and integrity than all of you combined. The room erupted in angry shouts, but Morgan did not back down. The truth is, you are all afraid. You are afraid that if Grace succeeds, it will prove that everything you have been telling yourselves about women is wrong. You are afraid that your wives and daughters will see what she has accomplished and start asking why they cannot do the same things. So you are trying to tear her down before she can show you up. Charles Donovan's face had gone very still. Those are strong words, Garrett. You are calling me a liar and a coward. I am calling you wrong. There is a difference. The tension in the room was explosive. Grace could see hands moving toward gun belts, could feel the violence simmering just beneath the surface. She stood up quickly, her heart pounding. "Gentlemen, please. This is not helping anyone." She looked at Donovan. "Mr. Donovan, you say my fences are not being maintained and my cattle are poorly managed. I invite you to come to my ranch and inspect it yourself. See for yourself whether what you are saying is true. I will open my books and show you my accounts. You can examine my herd and my property and judge for yourself whether I am capable of running a ranch." Donovan studied her for a long moment, and Grace could not read his expression. Finally, he nodded. "All right, Miss Patterson, I will take you up on that offer. I will come to your ranch tomorrow morning, and I will make a full inspection. If everything is as you say, I will report that to this association and withdraw my objections. But if I find that your operation is failing, you will agree to sell the ranch and stop this foolishness. Do we have a deal?" Grace knew she was taking a huge gamble. Everything depended on Donovan's judgment, and she had no guarantee that he would be fair. But she also knew that this was her best chance to prove herself once and for all. "We have a deal." That night, Grace and Morgan worked into the small hours, making sure every inch of the ranch was perfect. They checked every fence post, counted every head of cattle, organized the tack room, and cleaned the barn until it gleamed. Sarah helped too, bringing them coffee and food and words of encouragement. By the time the first rays of dawn broke over the mountains, they were exhausted but ready. Charles Donovan arrived promptly at 8 in the morning, accompanied by 2 other ranchers who would serve as witnesses. Grace met them in the yard, dressed in her work clothes with her father's old hat shading her eyes. Morgan stood beside her, and Grace was grateful for his steady presence. For the next 4 hours, Donovan conducted a thorough inspection of the ranch. He rode the fence lines and examined every post and wire. He walked through the cattle herd, checking for signs of disease or poor management. He looked at Grace's account books and questioned her about every entry. He inspected the barn, the equipment, the water sources, and the grazing land. He asked detailed questions about Grace's practices and procedures, and she answered everyone honestly and completely. Through it all, Morgan stayed close, ready to back up everything Grace said. And slowly, Grace began to see Donovan's expression change. The skepticism in his eyes faded, replaced first by surprise and then by something that might have been respect. When the inspection was finally over, they all stood in the ranch yard while Donovan conferred quietly with his 2 companions. Finally, Donovan turned to face Grace. "Miss Patterson, I came here today expecting to find a failing operation being run by someone who was in over her head. What I found instead is one of the best managed ranches I have seen in years. Your fences are in excellent condition, your cattle are healthy and well cared for, and your records are meticulous. You clearly know what you are doing." Grace felt relief wash over her like a wave. "Thank you, Mr. Donovan." But Donovan held up a hand. "I am not finished. While I cannot deny that you are running this ranch well, I still have concerns. The fact is, you are only able to do this because you have Garrett here helping you. What happens if he leaves? Will you be able to maintain this level of operation on your own?" Morgan spoke up before Grace could answer. Grace was running this ranch by herself for a month before I arrived, and she was managing fine. I have made things easier, but she does not need me. She needs help the same way any rancher needs help, because this is more work than one person can do alone. But make no mistake, this is Grace's ranch, and these are Grace's decisions. I am just a hired hand. Donovan looked at Morgan with sharp eyes. "You are more than that, and we both know it. The way you stood up for her yesterday, the way you are standing beside her now, that is not just an employee being loyal to a boss." He turned back to Grace. "There is talk in town that you two have an improper relationship, that he is living on your property without any proper oversight or chaperonage." Grace felt her face flush, but she met Donovan's gaze without flinching. "Morgan sleeps in the bunkhouse and I sleep in the main house. Our relationship is completely proper. But even if it were not, that would be my business and mine alone. My personal life has nothing to do with my ability to run this ranch. In an ideal world, that would be true, but we do not live in an ideal world. We live in a world where reputation matters, especially for women. If people believe that you are behaving improperly, it will be used against you." Donovan paused, then said carefully, "Have you considered marriage, Miss Patterson? If you and Garrett were to marry, it would solve a lot of problems. You would have a husband to handle the business dealings and provide protection, but you could still work the ranch as you have been doing. It would give you respectability and silence your critics." Grace felt Morgan stiffen beside her, but when she looked at him, his face was carefully blank. She turned back to Donovan, choosing her words carefully. "Mr. Donovan, I appreciate your advice, but I am not going to marry someone just to satisfy social conventions. If and when I marry, it will be because I love someone and want to build a life with him, not because it is politically convenient." Donovan nodded slowly. "I can respect that, but understand that by taking this stance, you are making your life much harder than it needs to be." He glanced at his companions, then back at Grace. "However, I am a man of my word. I inspected your ranch and I found it to be well run and properly managed. I will report this to the Cattlemen's Association and withdraw my objections to your membership. I will also make it clear that anyone who claims your ranch is failing is either misinformed or lying." "Thank you, Mr. Donovan. That means more than you know." After Donovan and his companions left, Grace sagged with relief. Morgan caught her arm, steadying her, and the warmth of his touch sent electricity racing through her body. She looked up at him and saw her own feelings reflected in his gray eyes, intense and unmistakable. "You were amazing," he said softly. "The way you stood up to him, the way you defended yourself in this ranch. I have never met anyone like you, Grace. I could not have done it without you. You have been my strength through all of this." They stood there in the yard, close enough that Grace could feel the heat of his body, could see the pulse beating in his throat. The air between them felt charged, as if the slightest movement would close the distance and bring them together. But before either of them could act on that impulse, Sarah came running out of the house, her face alight with joy. "You did it. You proved them all wrong. I am so proud of you." The moment broken, Morgan stepped back and Grace felt the loss like a physical ache. But she forced herself to smile at Sarah and accept the younger woman's enthusiastic hug. There would be time later to figure out what was happening between her and Morgan. Right now, they had won an important victory, and that was what mattered. The next few weeks brought a welcome period of calm. With Donovan's endorsement, the criticism of Grace's ranching abilities died down. Merchants in town began extending her credit again, and some of the other ranchers even started treating her with grudging respect. Luther Briggs continued to glower and make occasional threats, but without support from the wider community, there was little he could actually do. Sarah flourished in her new freedom. She helped around the ranch, learning skills she had never been allowed to develop under her father's restrictive rule. She read voraciously, borrowing books from the library in town and discussing them enthusiastically with Grace and Morgan in the evenings. And slowly, the haunted look in her eyes began to fade, replaced by confidence and hope. But as Grace's external problems eased, her internal turmoil only grew stronger. She was acutely aware of Morgan all the time, of his presence and his voice and the way he looked at her when he thought she was not watching. The attraction between them had grown into something that could no longer be ignored, but neither of them seemed willing to take the first step toward acknowledging it. Grace told herself it was because the timing was not right, because they were both focused on running the ranch and protecting Sarah. But deep down, she knew the real reason was fear. Fear of rejection, fear of ruining their working relationship, fear of admitting just how much she had come to need him. One evening in late June, Grace was sitting on the porch watching the sunset when Morgan came to join her. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and then Morgan spoke. "I need to talk to you about something." Grace felt her heart skip a beat at the serious tone in his voice. "All right. I have been thinking about what Donovan said, about marriage." Morgan paused, and Grace could see him struggling with the words. "I know you said you would not marry just for convenience, and I respect that. But Grace, what we have here, what we have built together over the past few months, it is more than just a working relationship. At least it is for me." Grace's breath caught in her throat. "What are you saying?" Morgan turned to face her, and the expression in his eyes made her heart pound. "I am saying that I love you. I think I started falling in love with you the day I met you, when you stood up in front of that crowd and offered me a job even though you did not know anything about me. And every day since then I have fallen deeper. You are the strongest, bravest, most capable person I have ever known, and I cannot imagine my life without you in it." Grace felt tears prick her eyes. "Morgan, I love you too. I have been so afraid to say it, afraid that you would not feel the same way." "How could I not feel the same way?" Morgan reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm and strong around hers. "Grace, I am not asking you to marry me because it would be convenient or because it would silence your critics. I am asking because I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to wake up every morning and see your face. I want to work beside you and build a future together. I want everything with you." Grace felt joy bubbling up inside her, so intense it was almost painful. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." Morgan pulled her into his arms, and when he kissed her, Grace felt like she had finally come home. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, and then it deepened into something fierce and passionate. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathless. "I promise I will spend the rest of my life proving that you made the right choice," Morgan said softly. "I already know I did," Grace replied and kissed him again. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church in Golden. Sarah stood beside Grace as her witness, wearing a new blue dress that Grace had helped her pick out. Tom McKenna stood with Morgan, and even gruff, old Charles Donovan attended, nodding his approval as Grace and Morgan exchanged their vows. Luther Briggs was notably absent, but Grace had not expected him to attend. He had made his feelings about the marriage quite clear, telling anyone who would listen that Grace Patterson had proven his point by running straight into the arms of her hired hand like the foolish woman she was. But Grace did not care. For the first time in months, she felt truly happy, truly at peace. After the ceremony, they held a small celebration at the ranch. A few of the neighboring ranchers came, along with some of the townspeople who had supported Grace through her difficulties. As the sun set and the guests began to leave, Sarah pulled Grace aside. "I have been thinking," Sarah said quietly. "You and Morgan are married now, and you do not need me here anymore. I should find my own place, make my own way." Grace shook her head firmly. "You are not going anywhere unless you want to. This ranch is your home for as long as you need it to be. Besides, we are going to need help once the baby comes." Sarah's eyes widened. "Baby, you are pregnant?" Grace laughed at her shocked expression. "No, not yet. But Morgan and I want children, and when we have them, we will need all the help we can get. So please, Sarah, stay. You are family now." Sarah hugged her tightly, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you for everything. You saved my life." "No," Grace said gently. "You saved your own life. You were brave enough to walk away from a bad situation and fight for something better. I just gave you a safe place to land." That night, Grace and Morgan stood together on the porch of the main house, now truly their home, and looked out at the ranch spread before them. The moon was full and bright, casting silver light over the rolling grassland and the mountains beyond. "What are you thinking?" Morgan asked, his arm warm around Grace's shoulders. "I am thinking about how much has changed in the past few months. When my father died, I thought I had lost everything. I thought I would have to fight alone to keep this place. But instead, I found you, and I found a future I never imagined possible." I was thinking the same thing. I spent years drifting from place to place, never settling down, never letting myself care too much about anything. And then I came here and met you, and suddenly I knew what I had been searching for all along. Grace turned in his arms and looked up at him, her heart overflowing with love. "What do you think the future holds for us?" Morgan smiled, that rare, wonderful smile that transformed his whole face. "I think we are going to build something amazing together. We are going to raise cattle and children, and we are going to prove to everyone that love and partnership are stronger than prejudice and tradition. We are going to show them that a woman can run a ranch just as well as any man, especially when she has a partner who believes in her completely." "And what about the people who still do not believe? The ones like Luther Briggs who think we are making a mistake? Let them think what they want. We know the truth, and in the end, that is all that matters." They stood together in the moonlight, two people who had found each other against all odds, and Grace knew that Morgan was right. They would face challenges and difficulties in the years to come. There would be hard times and setbacks, droughts and harsh winters, and people who would never accept that a woman could be an equal partner in running a ranch. But they would face it all together, and that made all the difference. The first year of their marriage was both challenging and wonderful. Grace and Morgan worked side by side every day, and Grace marveled at how natural it felt to share both the work and the decisions with someone who truly respected her abilities. They increased the herd gradually, building the ranch's reputation for quality cattle. They made improvements to the property, adding a new barn and expanding the grazing area. And through it all, their love only grew deeper and stronger. Sarah remained with them, becoming an indispensable part of the ranch operation. She had a natural gift with horses, and she took over much of the work of training and breaking the young animals. She also began teaching reading and writing to some of the children of the ranch hands on neighboring properties, using the skills she had fought so hard to develop. Grace watched her blossom with pride, knowing that Sarah had found her own path and her own purpose. Luther Briggs continued to cause occasional problems, spreading rumors and trying to turn people against them. But gradually, his influence waned as it became clear that the Patterson Garrett Ranch was thriving. Other ranchers began to respect Morgan and Grace as equals, seeking their advice on cattle management and range practices. And while there were still some who muttered that it was not proper for a woman to be so involved in ranch work, their voices grew quieter as Grace's success became undeniable. In the spring of 1884, Grace discovered that she was pregnant. The news filled her with a mixture of joy and fear. She worried about how having a child would affect her ability to work the ranch, worried that people would use her pregnancy as proof that women could not handle the physical demands of ranching. But Morgan was nothing but supportive, encouraging her to keep working as long as she felt able and promising that they would figure everything out together. As her pregnancy progressed, Grace did have to make some adjustments to her work routine. She could not ride as much in the later months, and heavy lifting became impossible. But she found other ways to contribute, managing the accounts and coordinating the work schedules, and handling the business negotiations with buyers and suppliers. And she discovered that being pregnant did not make her any less capable of making important decisions or commanding respect. Their son was born on a cold November morning, arriving with a lusty cry that announced his presence to the whole ranch. Morgan held the tiny baby with trembling hands, his gray eyes bright with tears, and Grace knew that their lives had changed forever in the most wonderful way possible. They named him Thomas Morgan Garrett, after Grace's father and Morgan's middle name. Little Tommy was a healthy, happy baby who seemed to thrive on the ranch life from the very beginning. Grace was determined not to let motherhood slow her down, and within weeks of Tommy's birth she was back to work, often carrying the baby in a sling as she moved around the ranch doing lighter tasks. The sight of Grace Patterson working with a baby strapped to her chest became a familiar one in Golden, and it sparked conversations throughout the community. Some people were scandalized, saying that a proper mother should stay home with her child. But others, particularly the younger women, looked at Grace with admiration and hope. She was proving that women could have both family and career, that motherhood did not have to mean giving up everything else. When Tommy was 6 months old, Sarah came to Grace and Morgan with news of her own. She had been corresponding with a young teacher in Denver, a man she had met through the library's book exchange program. They had been writing letters for nearly a year, discussing books and ideas and their dreams for the future. Now he had asked her to marry him, and Sarah wanted to know what Grace and Morgan thought. "You love him?" Grace asked. Sarah's face glowed. "I do. He is kind and intelligent, and he respects my opinions. He wants me to continue teaching even after we are married. He says he values my mind as much as my company." "Then you should marry him," Morgan said firmly. "You deserve happiness, Sarah. You deserve a partner who sees you as an equal." Sarah left for Denver a month later, and though Grace missed her, she was happy knowing that Sarah had found her own path to freedom and fulfillment. They promised to write regularly and visit when they could, and Sarah made Grace and Morgan promise that they would always consider her part of their family. With Sarah gone, Grace and Morgan hired 2 new hands to help with the ranch work. They chose carefully, looking for men who would respect Grace's authority and understand that she was an equal partner in running the operation. They found what they were looking for in a father and son team from New Mexico, experienced ranchers who had lost their own land to drought and were looking for a fresh start. Miguel and Carlos Rodriguez proved to be excellent workers and good men, and they fit seamlessly into the ranch operation. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and work and love. Grace and Morgan had 2 more children, a daughter they named Mary Grace in 1886, and another son they called William in 1889. Grace continued to work the ranch alongside Morgan, adjusting her responsibilities as needed but never giving up her role as an equal partner. And as their children grew, she taught them the same lessons her father had taught her. That hard work and determination mattered more than gender, that respect had to be earned, and that family meant standing together no matter what challenges arose. Tommy grew up to be a strong, capable boy who loved the ranch life as much as his parents did. Mary was quieter but just as determined, with a gift for understanding animals that reminded Grace of Sarah. And little William was still too young to show what his talents might be, but he had his father's gray eyes and his mother's stubborn chin, and Grace suspected he would be a force to be reckoned with when he grew up. In 1890, when Grace was 30 years old and had been running the ranch for 7 years, the Cattlemen's Association held a special meeting to discuss the future of ranching in Colorado. Grace and Morgan attended together, and as they walked into the meeting hall, Grace was struck by how much had changed since that first meeting where Charles Donovan had questioned her ability to run a ranch. Donovan was still the foreman of the Rutherford Ranch, and he still commanded enormous respect in the ranching community. But now he greeted Grace and Morgan warmly, shaking both their hands and asking about their children. Other ranchers who had once been skeptical now treated Grace as a colleague and peer. And while there were still some who disapproved of a woman being so actively involved in ranch management, they kept their opinions mostly to themselves. The meeting was called to order, and the association president, a man named Robert Sanderson, stood up to speak. "Gentlemen and lady," he added with a nod to Grace, "we have gathered today to discuss the changing landscape of ranching in Colorado. The open range is disappearing, barbed wire is changing how we manage our herds, and new technologies are transforming the industry. But more than that, our community itself is changing. We have new ranchers with new ideas, and we need to be willing to adapt and learn." He paused, then continued. "One of the most significant changes in our community over the past 7 years has been the success of the Patterson Garrett Ranch. When Grace Patterson first announced her intention to continue running her father's ranch, many of us were skeptical. Some of us," he glanced at Donovan, "were openly opposed. We said that women did not belong on ranches, that they could not handle the physical and mental demands of the work." Grace felt her heart begin to pound, unsure where this was going. "We were wrong," Sanderson said firmly. "Grace and Morgan Garrett have built one of the most successful ranches in this region. They have raised healthy cattle, managed their land responsibly, and contributed significantly to our community. And they have done it while raising a family and maintaining the highest standards of integrity and professionalism. Grace Garrett has proven that gender has nothing to do with a person's ability to run a successful ranch. What matters is knowledge, determination, and hard work. And she has those qualities in abundance." The room erupted in applause, and Grace felt tears spring to her eyes. Morgan squeezed her hand, his face glowing with pride. When the applause died down, Sanderson continued. "In recognition of her contributions to our ranching community, and in acknowledgement of the example she has set for all of us, I would like to propose that Grace Garrett be elected to the board of the Cattlemen's Association. All in favor?" A chorus of ayes filled the room, and Grace stood on shaking legs to accept the honor. As she looked around at the faces of the men who had once doubted her, who had once said that women did not belong on ranches, she felt a profound sense of vindication and pride. She had not just proven them wrong, she had changed their minds. That evening back at the ranch, Grace and Morgan sat on the porch as they had so many times before, watching the sun set over the mountains. Their children were asleep inside, the ranch was quiet and peaceful, and Grace felt a contentment so deep it was almost overwhelming. "Do you remember what you said to me on our wedding night?" Morgan asked. "About wondering what the future held for us." "I remember. I think we have our answer. We built something amazing, just like I said we would. We raised a family and grew this ranch and changed the way people think about what women can do. We did it all together." Grace leaned her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of leather and hay and the outdoors that always clung to him. "The foreman said women do not belong on ranches," she said softly, remembering Charles Donovan's words from so long ago. Morgan pulled her closer, his voice warm with love and pride. "And I said this woman belongs with me, and I was right." "You were right," Grace agreed, and kissed him as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. The years continued to flow by like the creek that ran through their property, steady and life-giving. Grace served on the Cattlemen's Association board for 15 years, helping to shape policies that made ranching more sustainable and inclusive. She became a mentor to other women who wanted to be more involved in their family ranches, offering advice and support, and proving by example that there were many different ways to build a successful life. Tommy grew up to take over much of the day-to-day ranch management, working side by side with his father while Grace focused more on the business and financial aspects of the operation. Mary married a veterinarian and opened a practice in Golden, but she still spent most of her free time at the ranch, helping with the animals she loved so much. William went east to study agriculture at a university, then returned home with new ideas about land management and cattle breeding that helped the ranch continue to thrive and grow. Sarah visited often from Denver, bringing her own growing family to stay at the ranch during summers. She had become a successful teacher and education advocate, fighting for better schools and more opportunities for girls. She always credited Grace and Morgan with showing her that it was possible to break free from limiting expectations and build a life based on your own values and dreams. Luther Briggs eventually left Golden, moving to California after a series of failed business ventures left him bitter and broke. Grace heard years later that he had died alone and unmourned, a cautionary tale about the dangers of letting prejudice and anger consume you. She felt a pang of sadness for him, for all the wasted years he had spent trying to control and diminish others, instead of building something meaningful of his own. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Morgan surprised Grace with a gift. He had been working secretly for months, and when he led her out to the yard and showed her what he had created, Grace burst into tears of joy. He had commissioned a beautiful wooden sign for the ranch entrance with carefully carved letters that read, "Patterson Garrett Ranch, EST, 1876. Founded by Thomas Patterson, built by Grace and Morgan Garrett." "You built this ranch as much as your father did," Morgan said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "You kept it alive when everyone said you would fail. You made it thrive when they said a woman could not do it. This ranch is your legacy as much as it was his, and I wanted everyone who comes here to know that." Grace traced the letters of the sign with her fingers, feeling the smooth wood and the weight of history and love. Her father would have been so proud of what she had accomplished, of the family she had raised and the life she had built. And Morgan, her partner in every sense of the word, had stood beside her through all of it, never trying to diminish her achievements or take credit for her work. He had simply loved her and supported her and helped her become the best version of herself. By the time Grace turned 50, the ranch had grown to over 1,000 acres and employed a dozen permanent hands. It was one of the most respected operations in Colorado, known for its quality cattle and progressive management practices. Grace had become something of a legend in ranching circles, the woman who had defied expectations and changed the industry. But to her family and friends, she was just Grace. Wife, mother, grandmother, rancher, and friend. One evening in the spring of 1901, Grace and Morgan sat on the porch as they had done countless times over the years. They were older now, their hair streaked with gray and their hands calloused from decades of hard work. But the love between them was as strong as ever, burnished by years of partnership and shared dreams. Their oldest grandson, Tommy's son Jack, was running around the yard chasing chickens while his younger sister toddled after him on unsteady legs. Mary's children were there too, visiting for the weekend, and the sound of childish laughter filled the air. William had just announced his engagement to a smart young woman he had met at university, and they were planning a summer wedding. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if things had gone differently?" Grace asked. "If I had sold the ranch after my father died? If you had not been there that day when I needed someone to hire?" Morgan considered the question seriously, as he always did. "I think about it sometimes. I think about how close we both came to missing this, to missing each other. But then I remember that we found each other because we were both willing to take a chance. You were brave enough to offer a job to a stranger when everyone else had turned you away. I was brave enough to accept, to stand with you even when it made my life harder. We chose this, Grace. We chose each other and we chose this life, and I would make the same choice again every single time." Grace felt her eyes fill with tears, but they were happy tears. "I would too, every single time." They sat together as the sun sank lower, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple. The mountains stood eternal in the distance, and the ranch spread out before them, alive and thriving after all these years. This was what they had built together, not just a successful business or a beautiful piece of land, but a home filled with love and purpose and possibility. The foreman had said women did not belong on ranches, but Grace had proved him wrong. She belonged here, on this land her father had claimed and she had fought to keep. She belonged in the saddle and the barn and the office, making decisions and working hard and building something that would last long after she was gone. And most importantly, she belonged with Morgan, the cowboy who had seen her not as a woman trying to do a man's job, but as an equal partner and the love of his life. Together they had created something beautiful and enduring, a legacy of love and determination that would live on in their children and grandchildren and all the generations yet to come. As darkness fell, and the stars began to appear, Grace and Morgan went inside to join their family for dinner. The house was full of noise and laughter and life, exactly as it should be. And as Grace looked around the table at all the faces she loved, she felt a peace and happiness so complete that it took her breath away. This was her happy ending, but it was also her happy middle and her happy beginning. Because every day with Morgan was a gift. Every morning on the ranch was a new adventure, and every moment with her family was a treasure beyond price. She had fought for this life and won it, and she would spend every remaining day being grateful for the chance to live it. The Patterson Garrett Ranch would continue to thrive for generations, a testament to the vision of Thomas Patterson, the courage of Grace Patterson Garrett, and the unwavering love and support of Morgan Garrett. It would be a place where hard work was valued over prejudice, where ability mattered more than gender, and where family meant standing together through every challenge and every triumph. And on quiet evenings, when the work was done and the family was gathered, someone would always tell the story of how it all began. How a young woman refused to give up her father's dream, how a cowboy saw past convention to recognize true strength and character, and how together they built something that would last forever. It was a love story and a success story, and a story of defiance and determination all rolled into one. The foreman had said women did not belong on ranches. The cowboy had said this woman belongs with me. And in the end, love and partnership and mutual respect had proven more powerful than prejudice and tradition. Grace and Morgan Garrett had shown the world that the only limits that truly mattered were the ones you placed on yourself, and that with courage and love, anything was possible. Their story became legend in Colorado ranching circles, inspiring generations of women to pursue their dreams regardless of what society said was proper or possible. And long after Grace and Morgan were gone, the ranch they built together continued to stand as a monument to what could be achieved when two people truly believed in each other and were willing to fight for their shared vision of the future. This was their legacy, not just land and cattle and buildings, but hope and possibility and the radical idea that love and partnership could overcome any obstacle. And it all started with a desperate woman offering a job to a stranger, and a cowboy who saw beyond convention to recognize something precious and worth fighting for. The end came peacefully for both of them, decades later, surrounded by the family they had built and the land they had loved. They died within days of each other, neither wanting to go on without their partner and best friend. And as they were laid to rest side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, everyone who had known them agreed that theirs had been a love story for the ages, a partnership that had changed not just their own lives, but the lives of everyone they touched. The Patterson Garrett Ranch continued under the management of their children and grandchildren, each generation adding their own contributions while honoring the foundation that Grace and Morgan had built. The sign Morgan had created remained at the entrance, weathered by time but still proudly proclaiming the names of the people who had built something lasting and true. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the work was done and the family gathered on the porch, someone would look out at the land and remember the stories they had been told. Stories of a woman who refused to give up and a man who loved her enough to stand beside her no matter what. Stories of courage and determination and the transformative power of love. The foreman had been wrong. Women did belong on ranches, and this particular woman had belonged with this particular cowboy, and together they had built something beautiful that would never be forgotten.